The sun had barely risen over the jagged mountains of eastern Afghanistan, yet the air already shimmered with heat. A dusty wind swept through the narrow valley, coating everything, the Humvees, the gear, the soldiers, in a fine layer of grit. Sergeant Emily Carter wiped the sweat from her brow and adjusted the strap on her medical bag. It was heavy, packed with supplies that could save lives, but never take one. To her, that distinction meant everything. "Hey, Doc," a voice called from behind her. Private Ramos, the youngest in their unit, jogged up with his usual grin. "You sure you don't want a rifle instead of that fancy purse?" Emily laughed softly, tightening the Velcro on her gloves. "I'll trade you for a bulletproof ego, Ramos." The other soldiers chuckled, the kind of laughter that soldiers used to fill the silence before danger. They all respected her, even if they teased her for being the medic, the one who ran toward blood instead of away from it. She wasn't the loudest or the toughest, but there was a calm about her that anchored the squad when everything else felt uncertain. Captain Rhodes, their commander, stood at the head of the convoy, checking his map. "All right, people, we're rolling out in 2 minutes," he shouted. "Intel says this road's clear, but we all know how much that's worth. Stay sharp." Emily climbed into the back of the lead Humvee, settling beside her medical kit. The radio crackled, the engines roared to life, and the convoy began its slow crawl through the valley, a trail of metal and dust snaking between ancient cliffs. She glanced at the jagged rock faces rising on both sides. They looked lifeless, but Emily had learned that in Afghanistan, stillness could be deceptive. Her eyes caught a distant glint on a ridge, maybe sunlight, maybe something else. She pushed the thought aside and turned to check her supplies again. Tourniquets, morphine, gauze, 4 bags. Everything in order. "Ever get tired of patching us up, Carter?" Ramos asked, his tone half serious. "Never," she replied. "Because it means you're still here to annoy me." That earned another laugh from the group. Beneath her calm surface, though, Emily always carried a quiet fear, not of dying, but of failing someone. Medics didn't get the luxury of panic. One mistake, 1 second of hesitation, and someone's brother, husband, or friend could be gone forever. The convoy moved steadily for nearly an hour, the hum of engines blending with the wind. The mountains loomed like sleeping giants, their shadows stretching across the road. The soldiers chatted lightly over the radio, sharing jokes and stories about home. Someone started humming a country song. It felt almost peaceful. Then, without warning, that peace cracked. The radio static shifted, a sharp, broken sound, and Rhodes' voice came through, tense. "Eyes up. Something doesn't feel right. Check the ridge at 2 o'clock. Emily leaned forward, scanning through the window slit. The ridge ahead looked barren. Rocks, dust, nothing unusual. But her gut twisted. She'd felt this before, that eerie stillness before everything goes wrong. She thought back to something her father had told her before she deployed. He'd been a firefighter, a man who ran into burning buildings without hesitation. "Calm doesn't mean safe," he'd said. "It just means danger hasn't announced itself yet." She was thinking about that when it happened. A flash, blinding and sudden, erupted from the side of the road. The sound came a split second later, a thunderclap that shook her bones. The Humvee in front of hers lifted off the ground and came crashing back down in a storm of dirt and metal. Shrapnel tore through the air. The convoy stopped instantly, tires screeching. I'd! Someone screamed over the radio. The valley erupted. Gunfire rained from the cliffs, sharp, relentless bursts that echoed like 1,000 hammers on steel. The mountains that had seemed so still moments ago were alive with muzzle flashes. Emily ducked low, instinct taking over. Her ears rang. The air was filled with dust so thick she could barely see the outline of her squad mates. Someone was yelling for cover. Someone else was screaming in pain. Her first instinct wasn't to grab a weapon. It was to move toward the cries. She pushed open the Humvee door, coughing through the smoke. The world around her was chaos. The lead vehicle was burning, black smoke twisting into the sky. She could barely make out shapes through the haze. Soldiers crawling, some firing blindly, some not moving at all. "Ramos, get down!" She shouted, but the young private was already dragging another man toward a ditch. Emily sprinted toward them, bullets kicking up dust at her feet. She slid beside them, adrenaline numbing the sting of gravel cutting into her knees. The soldier Ramos had pulled back, Private Lewis, was bleeding heavily from his leg. "Hold pressure," she ordered. Her hands moved automatically, tearing open her bag, pulling gauze and a tourniquet. The world narrowed to one thing, stopping the bleeding. Gunfire cracked overhead, so close it made her flinch, but she didn't stop. Blood pulsed between her fingers as she cinched the tourniquet tight. Lewis screamed, then gasped. "Am I gonna make it?" "You're not dying today," she said, forcing a steadiness she didn't feel. Ramos fired a few rounds toward the ridge, shouting, "They're everywhere. We're pinned down." Emily's radio crackled with static, and Rhodes' strained voice. "Alpha team, hold your position. We're taking fire from both sides." She looked toward his position, barely visible through the dust. A sharp burst of gunfire came from the right flank, forcing her and Ramos back against the rocks. Her heart pounded, but her mind stayed locked on one truth. Her soldiers needed her. Fear could come later. She crawled to another injured man, Corporal Davis, who was clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. "Stay with me," she said, pressing a bandage hard against the wound. "You're crazy," Davis groaned, eyes wide as bullets whizzed overhead. "Crazy keeps you alive," she muttered. Minutes stretched into eternity. The air was thick with smoke and screams. Somewhere, another explosion went off, closer this time. Emily's Humvee shuddered as she ducked instinctively. "Medic!" Another voice called from behind a burned-out vehicle. Emily looked back, saw the silhouette of Sergeant Halley waving frantically. Without hesitation, she sprinted toward him, keeping low, her medical kit bouncing against her hip. Every step felt like running through a nightmare. When she reached him, Halley was crouched over a soldier who'd been hit in the chest. She dropped beside him, pulling off her gloves. There was too much blood. She knew immediately the wound was bad. "Come on, stay with me," she said, pressing her hand to his chest. "You hear me? You're gonna be all right." But his eyes were already fading. For a brief second, the sounds around her seemed to vanish. No gunfire, no shouting, just the thud of her heart. She gritted her teeth, forcing herself back into focus. She couldn't save them all. She'd been told that 1,000 times in training, but it never felt real until now. She stood up, scanning the field. The fight wasn't slowing. The Taliban had them trapped in a perfect kill zone. Her commander's Humvee was still taking heavy fire. Emily felt a surge of desperation. She had done everything she could as a medic. Now all she could do was survive long enough to keep saving others. As she ducked back behind a rock, clutching her bloody gloves, she realized something chilling. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and communication was breaking down. The morning that had begun with laughter and sunlight had become a storm of death and courage. And deep inside, a quiet part of Emily knew this was only the beginning. The valley had transformed into a theater of chaos. Explosions tore through the quiet black smoke, curling into the bright morning sky. The convoy, once orderly, was now a cluster of burning Humvees and scattered soldiers. Bullets rattled off rocks, ricocheted into the earth, and tore through metal. echoing off the cliffs like 1,000 hammers. Emily's heart pounded, her breath ragged, but her hands moved with precision she didn't know she possessed. Her training screamed at her, "Stay calm, prioritize, move." She crawled toward the nearest injured soldier, ignoring the whistling bullets overhead. Private Lewis had taken a round to his leg, the wound pulsing crimson under the relentless sun. Emily pressed a tourniquet with every ounce of strength in her body, feeling the sticky heat of blood on her fingers. His face contorted in pain. "Stay with me," she said, voice steady despite the chaos. "You're not leaving today." A deafening explosion knocked her to the ground. Dust filled her eyes, making them water, but she blinked it away and rose again. From the ridge, the enemy fired with deadly precision, forcing soldiers to dive behind every available cover. Emily's ears rang, her chest burned, yet she refused to stay down. "Medic!" came a desperate cry from the other side of the valley. She pivoted, seeing Sergeant Holley trying to shield Corporal Davis, who clutched a chest wound that made Emily's stomach churn. The medic's instinct took over. She sprinted across a strip of dirt, dodging bullets, her boots kicking up dust. The world was chaos, yet each step was measured. She knew where to go, who to help first. Holley shouted, "Emily, hold on," as he fired back at the enemy, giving her the fraction of a second she needed. She reached Davis, her hands flying over the wound, packing gauze and applying pressure. His blood was warm against her skin. "You're gonna make it," she whispered, even though her own doubts whispered the opposite. Around her, the valley roared with gunfire. The soldiers were pinned from both sides. Taliban fighters had them boxed in, and the terrain gave them no cover. Emily could see a young private frozen in the open, terrified. She yelled, "Get down! Crawl!" and lunged toward him, dragging him behind a shattered Humvee. He shivered, eyes wide, but she held him close, steadying his breathing. Then she saw Rhodes. Her commander lay slumped against a boulder, blood seeping from his arm. He had been shot in the shoulder and could barely lift his rifle. Panic tried to claw at her, but Emily clenched her jaw. There was no time for fear. She crawled to him, feeling the weight of responsibility settle like a stone in her chest. "Hold this, sir," she said, handing him a bandage. "I've got you." She tore open her kit, applying pressure to the wound. Rhodes groaned but nodded. Around them, bullets whipped past, kicking up stones. Emily felt her hands trembling but forced them steady. One life at a time. That was all she could do. The enemy was relentless. From the ridge, a sniper's bullet whistled past, embedding itself in the Humvee behind her. The vehicle shuddered, and Emily stumbled back, clutching her medical bag. The wind carried the acrid smell of gunpowder and smoke. Somewhere in the valley, another explosion rocked the ground. "Emily, over here!" shouted Ramos, waving from behind a pile of rubble. He had pulled another wounded soldier to safety, but he was bleeding from a head wound, his face pale beneath the dust. Emily rushed to him, pressing gauze against the gash. "Hang on, Ramos. You're not done yet," she said, though the truth weighed heavy on her. They were surrounded. Supplies were running low. The odds were against them. Time became fragmented, a blur of shouts, gunfire, and explosions. Emily moved from soldier to soldier, patching wounds, applying tourniquets, and keeping everyone conscious. Every moment was a test of endurance, every breath a battle against panic. Then came a realization. Their ammunition was nearly gone, and the enemy was closing in. Emily's medical kit was almost empty. The thought that had never crossed her before began to creep in. She might need to defend herself. Not as a medic, not as a healer, but as a fighter. Her eyes fell on a rifle lying near Rhodes' fallen Humvee. She hesitated, a surge of disbelief and dread washing over her. She wasn't trained to kill. She was trained to save. Yet as the Taliban fighters crept closer, their eyes gleaming with deadly intent, Emily's hesitation vanished. Instinct took over. She grabbed the weapon, feeling its weight, foreign and heavy in her hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered under her breath. The first shot rang out, sharp and violent, cutting through the chaos. Emily's aim was shaky, her arms trembling, but each bullet found its mark. The enemy faltered, confusion rippling through their ranks. Her squad saw her, eyes wide, and rallied behind her courage. Emily moved with the rhythm of the battle, firing when necessary, ducking for cover, then sprinting back to tend to the wounded. One moment she was a medic, the next a defender. Every second stretched like an eternity. She dragged a wounded private behind a rock, pressing a bandage on his arm, while simultaneously keeping her eyes on the advancing enemy. Hours seemed to pass in minutes. Her muscles screamed, her lungs burned, but she refused to yield. Every soldier she saved became a lifeline for the others. Every shot she fired gave someone another chance to breathe. She was no longer just Emily the medic. She was Emily the lifeline, the heart of the defense. The ambush raged on, a living nightmare of blood, dust, and fire. The valley, once serene under the morning sun, was now a battlefield, scarred and smoldering. Emily's focus never wavered. She had no time to grieve, no time to fear. Only action. Only survival. Only saving lives. By the time the first reinforcements arrived, Emily had saved multiple soldiers from critical injuries and held the line long enough to prevent the ambush from turning into a massacre. Her uniform was soaked in blood, her own and that of others. Her hands were raw, shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion, yet she refused to rest. As the helicopter's blades cut through the air, signaling evacuation, Emily sat with her back against a rock, rifle at her side, bandaging yet another wound. She looked around at her squad, battered, exhausted, but alive. And in that moment, she understood something profound. The line between healer and fighter was thinner than she'd ever imagined. Courage was not about titles or rules. Courage was about action, about standing when the world expected you to fall. Emily breathed in the acrid air, her chest tight but resolute. The ambush was over, but its lessons would stay with her forever. The valley had tested her in every possible way, and she had survived. Not just by skill, but by the relentless determination to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. And deep inside, a quiet, unspoken truth settled. The medic who never fought had learned, in the fire of battle, that sometimes survival demanded more than healing hands. Sometimes it demanded courage she didn't know she had. The valley fell silent for a fleeting moment, but Emily Carter knew better than to trust it. The echo of gunfire still vibrated in her chest, her ears ringing from the explosions that had ripped through the convoy earlier. Smoke curled into the sky, black against the sun's glare, and the air reeked of burnt metal and blood. Around her, the squad was battered, bruised, but alive, at least for now. Every one of them owed their lives to her hands, and for the first time, she understood the weight of that responsibility. Her hands, still trembling from adrenaline, hovered over her medical kit. But it was empty. Every bandage, every tourniquet, every ounce of morphine had been used. She had saved as many as she could, but the enemy was regrouping, advancing with methodical precision. Their numbers were unknown, their intentions clear. They were determined to finish what they started. Emily's eyes fell on Captain Rhodes. He had been shot through the shoulder during the ambush, and though he was conscious, his rifle lay a few feet away, just out of reach. The thought struck her with unexpected clarity. Without someone to defend them, they would all die here. She glanced around at the squad, young soldiers like Ramos and Lewis, Hardened veterans like Halle, all relying on her, even if they didn't realize it. And then she saw it. A rifle, abandoned near the smoldering Humvee. Cold, heavy, alien in her hands, yet somehow familiar in its promise of protection. Her heart hammered. This was not what she was trained to do. She was a medic. She was meant to heal, not kill. But instinct whispered a cruel truth. If she didn't fight, no one would live. "I'm sorry," she whispered under her breath, gripping the weapon. Her fingers traced the metal, feeling the weight of responsibility in every groove and contour. She took a deep breath, steadying herself as best she could. The first shot she fired was shaky. She aimed instinctively at the nearest enemy, a figure moving too close to their cover. The bullet cracked through the air, striking its target. The man fell. Emily flinched at the sound of the impact, her stomach twisting. This was not a moment she had imagined when she joined the army, yet the moment demanded it. Life demanded it. Ramos and Halle saw her, eyes widening in disbelief. "Medic?" Halle shouted, but there was a note of awe in his voice. Emily didn't answer. There was no time. Another enemy fighter appeared on the ridge, taking aim at her squad. She fired again, each shot more confident than the last. The initial tremor in her hands was gone, replaced by a focus that cut through fear. The valley became a blur of motion. Emily firing, crawling, bandaging, firing again. Her dual role was exhausting, but necessary. She alternated between patching wounds and picking off threats, moving seamlessly from healer to defender. The adrenaline coursing through her veins made her feel invincible, but she knew better. Every moment could be her last. Private Lewis screamed as a bullet grazed his leg, and Emily lunged to him, dragging him behind a rock. "Stay with me?" she shouted, pressing a bandage to the wound. He whimpered, teeth clenched against the pain, but he survived because she refused to hesitate. Hours seemed to compress into minutes, yet each second was an eternity. Emily's muscles burned, her lungs ached, and her hands were slick with blood, her own and that of others. She had lost track of how many she had saved or how many had fallen. Names blurred, faces blurred. There was only the mission: protect the living, honor the fallen, and survive. Then came a moment of stark clarity. A group of fighters was maneuvering around their flank, unseen until now. Emily's pulse spiked. She realized that if they reached the rear, the squad would be annihilated. Without thinking, she sprinted across the open stretch of dirt, bullets kicking up clods of earth around her. Her heart thudded against her rib cage as she crouched, aimed, and fired. Her shots found their mark. 2 fighters went down. A third retreated, and the rest hesitated. The squad, inspired by her courage, surged forward. Halle and Ramos picked up their rifles with renewed determination. Emily had ignited something in them, a refusal to yield, a spark of resistance that no ambush could extinguish. But the cost was mounting. Every action had a price. Emily's hands were bleeding, raw from handling both medical supplies and weapons. Her vision blurred from exhaustion and dehydration. Her throat ached from shouting, and yet she pressed on, driven by an unshakable sense of duty. She had crossed a line she never thought she would, and there was no turning back. Somewhere in the valley, another explosion erupted, throwing Emily to the ground. She coughed, choking on smoke, but forced herself up. She had to keep moving. She had to keep fighting. Each step was a defiance of fear, each shot a testament to survival. At one point, she stumbled upon a young private, frozen in the open, paralyzed by terror. "Move! Crawl!" Emily shouted, grabbing his arm and dragging him behind a boulder. He clung to her, sobbing, and she held him tight, murmuring, "I've got you. You're going to make it." The battle raged around her, unrelenting. Emily's dual role as medic and fighter became a delicate balance. One hand on a rifle, the other on a tourniquet, one eye on the enemy, the other on the wounded. She realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it, the decision to act when every instinct screamed to run. Hours passed like this, a relentless cycle of violence and salvation. Emily had taken down more enemy fighters than she could count and saved countless lives. Yet she felt no triumph, only exhaustion and a deep, knowing awareness of mortality. She had crossed a boundary between healer and warrior that she could never uncross. Then, as if the valley itself had grown weary, the enemy began to pull back. Shots became sporadic and ceased altogether. Silence fell, heavy and unreal. Emily sank to her knees, rifle resting across her lap, her chest heaving. She looked around at the squad, battered, bloodied, but alive. They had survived. Against all odds, they had survived. Her hands shook uncontrollably as she wiped the grime and blood from her face. She realized, with a mixture of awe and horror, that she had changed. Forever. The medic who never fought had become a defender, a soldier in every sense of the word. Captain Rhodes crawled toward her, his arms slung across his chest. "Emily," he rasped, voice hoarse, "you saved us." "All of us." Emily didn't respond immediately. She stared at her hands, still covered in blood, still holding the rifle. "I just did what I had to," she whispered. It wasn't heroism. It was survival. Yet deep down, she understood something profound. Courage was not a title or a medal. It was a choice, repeated over and over, in moments when the world demanded more than any one person thought they could give. The sun began its descent behind the mountains, casting long shadows over the valley. Emily lowered her rifle, exhausted yet alert. She looked at her squad, alive and breathing, and allowed herself a brief moment of relief. They had made it through the ambush. They were safe for now. And in that quiet, tenuous peace, Emily Carter realized that the battlefield had changed her forever. The medic who never fought had discovered a new identity, one forged in fire, blood, and unyielding resolve. The valley would never forget her, and neither would she. The valley had grown eerily quiet after the last shots echoed off the cliffs. The enemy's retreat left the air thick with dust, smoke, and the metallic tang of blood. Emily Carter's chest heaved, her muscles trembling from exhaustion, but there was no time to rest. Every second could bring another threat, another soldier in need. She moved with methodical precision, tending to the wounded while keeping a wary eye on the ridges. Private Lewis groaned, shifting on the scorched earth as Emily checked his bandages. "How's he doing?" Captain Rhodes asked, his voice weak but steady, leaning against a boulder. "Stable for now," Emily replied, eyes scanning the valley. "But we need to move the others to cover before nightfall. More enemies could be lurking nearby." The soldiers, battered and shaken, obeyed without question. The fear was palpable, but so was the trust in Emily. In those moments, she realized that courage was contagious. Her willingness to confront danger inspired others to do the same. Emily's mind raced back to the first moments of the ambush, the deafening explosions, the screams, the weight of responsibility pressing down on her chest. It had all happened in a blur, yet each action had been deliberate, guided by instinct and training. She had fired her first shot in self-defense, and something had shifted. The line between medic and fighter had blurred, and for the first time, she understood the full gravity of her role. "Emily," Ramos called, dragging a wounded comrade toward a shattered Humvee. His head was bleeding, but he managed a grim smile. "I don't know how you do it." Emily shook her head, pressing gauze to another soldier's arm. "I don't have a choice," she said. "Not when lives are on the line." The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long shadows across the valley. Emily knew that darkness would bring new challenges. Visibility would drop, reinforcements would arrive slowly, and the enemy could strike again. She signaled for the squad to consolidate their position behind the largest Humvee still standing. As they moved, Emily kept a watchful eye on every ridge and every crack in the rocks. Her hands, though blistered and bloody, worked efficiently, checking wounds, applying tourniquets, and offering quiet words of reassurance. She realized that leadership was not about giving orders. It was about presence, about calm under pressure, about being the anchor in the storm. Captain Rhodes limped toward her, his injury slowing him. "Emily, you've done more than any medic could have been expected to do," he said, voice hoarse. "We owe our lives to you." Emily shook her head. "No, Captain. We all owe our lives to each other. I'm just the one who happened to be in the right place at the right time." Her words were humble, but inside, a fire burned. She knew she had changed. She was no longer just a healer. She was a defender, a strategist, and a symbol of resilience. The ambush had forced her into a new identity, one that demanded both compassion and ferocity. As night approached, Emily organized the squad into defensive positions. She assigned soldiers to cover the flanks, checked ammunition, and ensured that the wounded were stabilized. The valley, once a place of serene beauty, was now a scarred battlefield. Yet within that chaos, Emily found clarity. Leadership was about making decisions, even impossible ones, and accepting the consequences. Hours passed with tense silence. The squad remained vigilant, listening for the slightest hint of movement. Emily's thoughts drifted to home, to the life she had left behind, to her family, to the dreams she had once held. She wondered if she would ever feel safe again, if the memories of this day would ever fade. But she pushed the thoughts aside. There was no room for distraction. Lives depended on her focus. Suddenly, a distant noise shattered the quiet, a single gunshot, echoing off the cliffs. Emily's heart raced. She raised her rifle, scanning the ridges. The squad followed her lead, weapons ready, but it was only a goat startled by the wind. Relief washed over her, but it was fleeting. She knew the enemy was still out there, watching, waiting for the next opportunity. Emily's gaze fell on the wounded soldiers. Their eyes reflected fear, pain, and trust. In that moment, she understood something essential. Courage was not the absence of fear. It was the ability to act despite it, to embrace responsibility even when the odds seemed insurmountable. She had saved lives not because she was fearless, but because she refused to let fear dictate her actions. The turning point had come earlier that day, in the midst of chaos and bloodshed, when she had picked up the rifle. But the realization now was deeper. She was no longer just reacting to events. She was anticipating them, strategizing, leading. The battlefield had demanded more than she ever thought possible, and she had risen to meet it. Hours turned into the quiet of night. Emily remained vigilant, ensuring that every soldier was accounted for and that the wounded were stable. She reflected on the journey that had brought her here, the rigorous training, the deployment, the camaraderie of the squad, and the unspoken bond formed in moments of extreme danger. She had always known that being a medic meant facing life and death situations, but nothing had prepared her for the moral and physical challenges of direct combat. Yet in the midst of exhaustion, she felt a strange sense of empowerment. She had faced the enemy, confronted her own fears, and emerged with a renewed understanding of her capabilities. The turning point was not just about survival. It was about transformation. She had discovered strength she did not know she possessed, courage that could not be measured by medals or accolades, and resilience that would carry her through the darkest moments. Emily looked at her squad, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of the remaining Humvees. They were weary, scarred, but alive. And she realized that her actions had not only saved lives, but had also inspired a sense of unity, trust, and determination among them. Leadership, she understood now, was about more than orders. It was about presence, example, and unwavering commitment. The night stretched on, and Emily allowed herself a brief moment to sit, leaning against the rock that had shielded her earlier. She closed her eyes, listening to the sounds of the valley, the distant rustle of wind, the faint cries of wounded animals, the soft groans of her squad. She knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for the first time, she felt a quiet confidence in her ability to face them. The ambush had tested her in ways she could never have imagined. It had forced her to confront fear, make impossible decisions, and embrace a new role she had never sought. But in doing so, she had discovered the depth of her courage, the power of resilience, and the true meaning of duty. Emily Carter, a medic who never fought, had become a defender, a leader, and a symbol of unwavering strength. The turning point had come not in a single moment, but in the accumulation of choices, actions, and unwavering resolve. She had stepped beyond the boundaries of her training, into a realm where courage was defined not by absence of fear, but by the determination to act in spite of it. As dawn approached, Emily remained vigilant, her eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of danger. The valley was still scarred, the echoes of the ambush lingering in every shadow. But she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had faced the unimaginable, and had emerged not only alive, but transformed. The turning point was not merely survival. It was the discovery of a deeper strength, a courage that would guide her through the battles yet to come. And as the first light of morning broke over the mountains, Emily Carter understood that she was no longer just a medic. She was a warrior, a protector, and a beacon of hope for those who relied on her. The valley had tested her, shaped her, and revealed the extraordinary depths of her courage. And in that revelation, she found the clarity and resolve that would define the rest of her journey. The valley was quiet now, but Emily Carter knew better than to trust the silence. The acrid smell of smoke and blood lingered, mingling with the dust that coated everything. The once bright, sun-drenched landscape was now marred by destruction, burning Humvees, shattered rocks, and the still forms of those who hadn't survived. Emily's uniform was soaked with sweat and grime, her hands raw and trembling, yet she forced herself forward. The work was far from over. She moved among her squad, checking on each soldier with methodical care. Private Lewis had been stabilized after his leg wound, but his face was pale, etched with shock. Sergeant Hawley and Corporal Davis were bruised and battered, but alive. Emily applied fresh bandages, tightened tourniquets, and whispered words of reassurance, her voice calm even as the storm of battle still raged in her mind. "Doc, I don't know how you keep going," Ramos muttered, gripping the side of the Humvee. Blood streaked his face from a gash above his brow. Emily looked at him, noting the fear and exhaustion etched into his features. "I don't have a choice," she replied softly. "We keep moving, we keep fighting, we keep saving each other. That's the only way any of us make it out of here." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Emily's calm, unwavering presence had become the anchor for the squad. In the midst of chaos, she was the heart that kept them alive, the force that reminded them that even in the darkest moments, survival depended on courage and determination. The sun climbed higher, and with it came renewed threats. Scouts on the distant ridges reported enemy movements, and Emily knew the ambush wasn't over. The Taliban fighters were relentless, and the squad was still vulnerable. Emily's mind raced, calculating strategies and prioritizing tasks. She couldn't just heal. She had to protect. Her rifle was ready at her side, and she moved fluidly between tending to the wounded and engaging threats. Every shot she fired was precise, born of necessity and instinct. Her hands, once solely instruments of healing, now balanced the dual responsibility of defense and care. Each enemy she neutralized was another moment bought for someone's life, another chance for survival. Hours passed like days. Emily's body screamed with exhaustion. Her legs burned from constant movement, her shoulders ached from carrying wounded soldiers, and her fingers were raw from gripping both bandages and a rifle. Sweat and blood mixed on her skin, creating a gritty film that coated her uniform. Yet she pressed on, refusing to falter. She crouched behind a crumpled Humvee, applying a fresh dressing to Hale's arm. "Almost done," she murmured, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Hale nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude and disbelief. Emily had become more than a medic. She was a savior, a shield against the tide of death that had swept through the valley. Nearby, Private Ramos shivered, clutching his side where a bullet had grazed him. Emily knelt beside him, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. "You're okay," she said, forcing calm into her tone. "We've got you. Just hold on." The young soldier's lips quivered, but he drew a shaky breath, trusting her. Between tending to the wounded, Emily's eyes never left the ridges. Every shadow could hide an enemy, every movement a threat. She had become hyper-aware, her senses sharpened to an almost painful degree. She noticed the glint of sunlight off a distant barrel, the faint whisper of movement in the dust, and the subtle signs that indicated danger was near. The squad, inspired by her courage, moved with renewed determination. They covered each other, fired when necessary, and trusted Emily to guide them through the chaos. Her actions had ignited something in them, a refusal to surrender, a bond forged in the crucible of battle. And then came the moment that would define the rest of the day. A group of enemy fighters had flanked the squad, attempting to close in from the valley's far side. Emily's eyes widened as she assessed the threat. There was no time for hesitation. She raised her rifle, aimed, and fired with deadly precision. One enemy went down, another staggered, and the rest faltered. "Move! Take cover!" she shouted, her voice cutting through the dust and noise. The squad responded immediately, scrambling behind rocks and vehicles, guided by her commands. Emily moved alongside them, firing, ducking, and returning to her duties as medic in a seamless rhythm. She reached a wounded soldier lying near the center of the valley. His uniform was soaked in blood, and he was barely conscious. Emily knelt beside him, applying pressure to a chest wound. "Stay with me," she whispered, her hands trembling but steady. "I've got you. You're not leaving today." The soldier's eyes fluttered open, and he managed a weak nod. Emily's heart tightened. Every life she saved was a small victory, but the cost was ever present. The valley was littered with the fallen, soldiers who hadn't made it, their absence a stark reminder of the stakes. As the sun began its descent, Emily realized the battle had reached a critical point. The enemy was regrouping, and the squad was running low on ammunition and medical supplies. She quickly assessed the situation and devised a plan. The wounded needed to be moved to a safer location, the squad needed to consolidate positions, and she needed to maintain control of the battlefield. Emily's voice carried across the valley. "Hale, cover the left flank. Ramos, stay with the wounded. Lewis, help me with the casualties near the Humvee. Everyone else, watch the ridge. Move fast, stay low, stay sharp." Her orders were precise, her tone calm but commanding. The soldiers moved with renewed urgency, trusting her guidance. Emily worked tirelessly, alternating between firing at advancing enemies and tending to the wounded. Every action was deliberate, every movement a calculated decision in the high-stakes game of survival. Hours dragged on, the sun dipping lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the valley. Emily's body ached, her lungs burned, and her hands were slick with blood and sweat. Yet she pressed on, refusing to give in to exhaustion or fear. She had become the squad's anchor, their unwavering force in a sea of chaos. Finally, as the last light of day faded, the enemy began to retreat. Shots became sporadic, then ceased altogether. Emily slumped against a rock, her rifle resting across her lap. The valley was silent once more, but the silence was heavy with the weight of what had transpired. She looked around at her squad, battered, bloodied, but alive. Each soldier's life had been touched, saved, and preserved by her courage and determination. Emily's hands shook as she wiped grime and blood from her face. Exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, but there was also a deep sense of fulfillment. She had done everything she could, and it had been enough. Captain Rhodes crawled toward her, his arm still bleeding. "Emily," he began, voice hoarse, "you saved us." "All of us?" Emily shook her head, exhausted but resolute. "We saved each other," she replied. "I just happened to be in the right place at the right time." Her gaze drifted to the valley floor, littered with remnants of battle, spent shell casings, broken vehicles, and the bodies of fallen soldiers. The scene was grim, a stark reminder of the cost of survival. Yet amidst the devastation, there was life. Her squad was alive. And that, above all, mattered. As darkness fell, Emily helped organize the squad for the night. The wounded were secured, defensive positions were established, and a watch rotation was set. The valley remained dangerous, but Emily had instilled order and discipline amidst chaos. She had become both medic and protector, healer and warrior, balancing the dual responsibilities with unwavering determination. Sitting against a rock, Emily allowed herself a brief moment to breathe. Her thoughts drifted to the soldiers she had saved, to those she couldn't, and to the profound transformation she had undergone. The ambush had tested every limit of her body, mind, and spirit, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, and forever changed. Blood, dust, and valor. These were the marks of her day, the evidence of courage forged in fire. Emily Carter, the medic who had never fought, had become the heart of her squad, a symbol of resilience, determination, and unwavering commitment. The night deepened, and the valley fell into a tense, uneasy quiet. Emily remained vigilant, her eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of renewed attack. Every sound, every shadow, was a potential threat. Yet she felt a strange sense of calm amidst the chaos. She had faced death, confronted fear, and acted decisively. She had discovered depths of courage she never knew existed. And in that quiet, dust-filled valley, Emily Carter understood something profound. Valor was not measured by medals or recognition. It was measured by the choices one made in the face of impossible odds, by the determination to protect and preserve life, even when all seemed lost. The night in the valley was long, oppressive, and filled with the low groans of the wounded. Emily Carter remained on high alert, sitting against a rock with her rifle at her side and a flashlight resting on her knees. The adrenaline that had carried her through the ambush had begun to ebb, leaving exhaustion, soreness, and the emotional weight of what had happened. Her hands were raw from bandaging, shooting, and gripping weapons. Her uniform was soaked in sweat, dust, and blood, some of it her own. Around her, the squad tended to themselves as best they could. Halle cleaned a minor wound on his forearm. Lewis rested against the Humvee, and Ramos sat in silence, staring at the valley floor. The silence was different this time, not the tense quiet before an attack, but the heavy, reflective quiet of survival. Emily could feel it pressing on her, the understanding that lives had been saved, yet others had been lost. "Doc," Rhodes murmured, crawling toward her with his wounded shoulder. "I don't know how you did it." Emily shook her head, her voice hoarse. "I didn't do it alone." We all survived because we looked out for each other. Rhodes nodded, though his expression betrayed the toll the day had taken. Emily could see it in his eyes, the exhaustion, the worry, the guilt that always followed after a battle. She knew she carried some of that too. Every life she couldn't save weighed on her like a stone in her chest. As the hours passed, Emily moved among the soldiers, checking wounds again, reapplying dressings, and offering quiet words of encouragement. The valley, now bathed in moonlight, looked almost peaceful, but she knew the danger wasn't entirely gone. Night in Afghanistan carried its own threats. The enemy could be lying in wait, returning at any moment. "Doc," Ramos whispered, his voice trembling. "I don't think I can stop shaking." Emily crouched beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It's okay," she said softly. "What we went through. It's normal to feel scared. What matters is that you're still here, and you're going to make it. We're all going to make it." She realized, in that moment, that her role had shifted again. Beyond being a medic, beyond being a defender, she had become a pillar of emotional strength. She had to hold herself together, not just for her own survival, but for the squad's. Fear was contagious, but so was courage, and she had to ensure it spread. As dawn approached, Emily began organizing a more secure perimeter. The soldiers were weary, and injuries had to be managed carefully. She taught Lewis how to check vital signs, instructed Hall on emergency bandaging, and ensured that everyone had water and basic supplies. The ambush had taught them all hard lessons about preparedness, vigilance, and trust. When the sun finally rose, it cast a stark light over the valley, revealing the full extent of the battle's aftermath. Humvees were damaged, deer scattered, and the rocky terrain was littered with evidence of the fierce fight. Emily's heart tightened as she surveyed the scene. She had saved lives, yes, but the valley also bore witness to loss. She had seen death firsthand, and it had left an indelible mark on her soul. Rhodes approached her, leaning heavily on his rifle. "We need to move," he said. "Reinforcements should be on the way, but we can't stay here." Emily nodded, gathering the remaining supplies and ensuring the wounded were secured. She helped carry the injured, alternating between leading and following as they navigated the jagged terrain. Every step was deliberate, every movement a balance of caution and urgency. During the slow march out of the valley, Emily reflected on what had happened. The ambush had forced her to confront the limits of her training, her courage, and her moral compass. She had fired a weapon for the first time in combat, crossing a line she had never imagined crossing. Yet in doing so, she had saved lives and inspired her squad to act with bravery and unity. At a brief halt behind a ridge, Emily crouched to tend to Lewis again. His wound had been stabilized, but he was pale and shaking. "You really saved me," he said, voice barely audible. Emily smiled faintly, though fatigue weighed heavily on her. "We saved each other," she replied. "And you did your part too. We're a team. Don't forget that." The squad moved cautiously, the sun rising higher, illuminating the valley in harsh light. Emily's senses remained sharp, scanning for any signs of remaining threats. The ambush had changed her. She was no longer just a medic. She was a defender, a strategist, and a leader. Her perspective had shifted, blending the compassion of healing with the decisiveness of combat. Hours later, when reinforcements finally arrived, Emily guided them to the wounded, providing detailed accounts of injuries, treatments administered, and the sequence of events. Her calm, precise demeanor impressed the incoming soldiers, many of whom had heard stories of the ambush's intensity. She had become the central figure in the narrative of survival, a testament to courage and resourcefulness under fire. Even as she debriefed with the reinforcements, Emily's thoughts drifted to the soldiers who hadn't made it. Faces of the fallen flickered in her mind, memories she couldn't shake. Guilt mingled with relief, sorrow with pride. She had saved lives, but she had also witnessed death in its rawest form. The emotional weight was crushing, yet she carried it with quiet dignity, understanding that this was part of being a soldier, a medic, and a human being. Later, as the squad began the journey back to base, Emily walked at the center, ensuring everyone was accounted for, checking wounds, and providing reassurance. She had become the heartbeat of the unit, the presence that maintained cohesion and morale. Her role had evolved again. She was no longer merely a healer or a fighter. She was the embodiment of courage under pressure. By the time they reached a secure outpost, Emily was physically drained, her body screaming for rest. But the emotional toll weighed equally heavily. She sat on a cot, finally allowing herself a moment to breathe. Her hands were raw, her uniform tattered, and her mind replayed the day's events over and over. She had faced unimaginable danger, acted decisively, and emerged with lives saved, yet the memories would linger indefinitely. Captain Rhodes approached her, a mixture of respect and gratitude in his eyes. "Emily," he said softly, "I don't know what to say. You went above and beyond. You saved us all." Emily shook her head, weary but resolute. "I didn't do it alone," she replied. "We survived because we worked together. That's all any of us could do." As night fell over the outpost, Emily reflected on the journey she had undertaken, from medic to defender, from healer to warrior. The ambush had forced her to confront fear, make impossible choices, and embrace a new identity. She had discovered reserves of courage, resilience, and determination that she hadn't known existed. The aftermath of courage was not just the physical injuries or the scars on the valley. It was the emotional and mental toll, the burden of responsibility, and the profound understanding of what it meant to protect life under extreme circumstances. Emily had survived, yes, but she had also changed irrevocably. She lay on the cot, staring at the ceiling, the sounds of the outpost around her. Sleep beckoned, but her mind remained alert, replaying scenarios, evaluating decisions, and silently honoring those who had fallen. Emily Carter had faced death, embraced courage, and carried the weight of survival with grace and determination. In the quiet, she understood a simple truth. Bravery was not the absence of fear, nor was it a momentary act of heroism. Bravery was the accumulation of choices made under pressure, the persistence to act when every instinct screamed to flee, and the unwavering commitment to protect those who could not protect themselves. And as she drifted into an uneasy sleep, Emily Carter carried with her the lessons of the valley, lessons of courage, resilience, and the transformative power of choice in the face of unimaginable adversity. The valley remained etched in Emily Carter's mind long after the last bullet had been fired. Even as the squad settled into the outpost, safe from immediate danger, the shadows of the ambush lingered, wrapping around their thoughts like a heavy fog. She walked among the soldiers, checking wounds, offering quiet words, and observing the silent weight that clung to each of them. The fear, relief, and exhaustion were palpable, but so was the bond forged in battle. Emily's own body ached, muscles stiff from hours of relentless activity, yet the emotional toll pressed even harder. She had been tested in ways she never anticipated, forced to cross the line between healer and fighter, to take lives when necessary, and to carry the responsibility of survival for those who had trusted her. Each memory, each fleeting sound of the ambush replayed in her mind with unrelenting clarity. Captain Rhodes called the squad together in the fading light. His shoulder injury had been treated, yet he leaned on his rifle as he addressed them. "Today, you all demonstrated courage beyond measure," he said, voice steady but heavy with exhaustion. "And Emily, you went beyond anyone's expectations. You were the reason we all made it out alive." Emily shook her head, brushing dirt and blood from her uniform. "We survived together," she said softly. I was just doing what had to be done. The soldiers nodded, but Emily could see the gratitude in their eyes. They had seen her act under fire, witnessed her transition from medic to defender, and understood the weight she had carried. She had become more than a healer. She had become the heart of the squad, the anchor in the chaos, the one who inspired courage when fear threatened to overwhelm them. Yet even as she acknowledged their survival, Emily felt the shadows lurking within. Nightmares had already begun to creep into her thoughts. Flashes of the fallen, the screams, the unrelenting roar of gunfire. She knew the psychological wounds could be as severe as the physical ones. Soldiers could walk away from battle alive, yet carry scars invisible to the eye, scars that could haunt them for years. Ramos approached her quietly, avoiding the attention of the others. "Doc," he said, voice trembling, "I can't stop seeing it. The bodies, the blood." Emily placed a hand on his shoulder. "I know," she said gently. "It's normal. What we went through. It wasn't easy, but you're alive, and that counts. We have to remember that." They sat together for a few moments in silence, the weight of their shared experiences heavy but strangely comforting. Emily realized that part of her role now was not just to heal wounds and fend off enemies, but to help her squad process the aftermath, to guide them through the psychological shadows that threatened to consume them. As night deepened, the outpost quieted. Soldiers found cots or blankets, some sitting alone, others huddled in small groups. Emily remained vigilant, scanning the perimeter even as exhaustion pressed on her. Sleep was a luxury she could barely afford, yet she felt the relentless pull of fatigue threatening to overtake her. Her mind wandered back to the ambush, the deafening explosions, the screams of the injured, the split-second decisions that had determined life or death. Each memory was sharp, a vivid reminder of how fragile survival could be. Yet within those memories, she also found flashes of courage, her own and that of her squad. That courage had been forged in fire, tempered by blood and determination. The next morning, Emily led the squad through debriefings, recounting the events with precision and clarity. Every detail mattered, the sequence of attacks, the locations of the wounded, the moments when her actions had made the difference. She instructed the squad on psychological awareness, emphasizing the importance of watching for signs of trauma in themselves and each other. The ambush had changed them all, and Emily understood that healing now extended beyond bandages and medicine. Captain Rhodes pulled her aside later, his expression grave. "Emily, I need you to know. Your actions today have set a standard," he said. "But you also need to take care of yourself. The valley doesn't just take the weak physically. It tests the mind, the spirit. Don't ignore that." Emily nodded, appreciating the warning, but feeling a surge of responsibility. There was a duty she couldn't shake, a commitment to her squad that demanded her presence and guidance. Yet she recognized that the shadow she carried needed acknowledgement, not suppression. She had fought not just for survival, but to preserve the humanity within herself and her squad. Over the following days, Emily organized training exercises and simulations for her squad, combining tactical drills with medical scenarios. She emphasized teamwork, communication, and resilience, drawing from the harsh lessons of the ambush. The soldiers responded with respect and dedication, their trust in her deepening with every exercise. Emily had become more than a medic. She was a leader, shaping the next chapter of their journey. But even amidst this routine, the valley shadows lingered. At night, Emily sometimes woke to the echo of gunfire or the screams of the wounded. Her body tensed, and her mind raced through the events of the ambush. She realized that courage wasn't just about surviving the moment. It was about living with the aftermath, confronting the memories, and finding meaning in the chaos. One evening, as Emily sat by the perimeter, Halle joined her. "You've changed," he said quietly. I mean, you're different. Stronger, braver. I don't know how to explain it. Emily looked at him, tired but resolute. I had to change, she said. The valley forced it. But strength isn't just about fighting. It's about holding on, guiding others, and making the impossible decisions when there's no one else to do it. Halle nodded, absorbing her words. I get that. And you? You were amazing out there. Don't forget that. Emily allowed herself a faint smile. Recognition was rare in her line of work, but she didn't seek it. The true reward was survival. For herself, her squad, and the lives she had fought to preserve. In the days that followed, Emily continued to balance the demands of leadership, medical care, and personal resilience. She mentored younger soldiers, tended to the injured, and maintained vigilance over the valley's perimeter. Each day was a test, but she faced it with a calm determination, aware that the lessons of the ambush were now woven into her identity. The shadows of the valley were not easily dispelled. Memories of fire, blood, and fear lingered, sometimes unbidden, sometimes surfacing in quiet moments. Yet Emily understood that these shadows were part of her story, reminders of courage, resilience, and the profound responsibility of protecting life under impossible circumstances. One evening, as the squad gathered around a small fire, Emily reflected on the journey they had endured together. Each soldier bore scars, physical, emotional, and mental, but they were alive. The ambush had tested every limit, and yet they had emerged, forged by fire and bounded by shared survival. Emily felt a sense of pride, tempered by the weight of memory. Captain Rhodes raised his mug in a quiet toast. To survival, to courage, and to Emily Carter, who reminded us what it means to never give up. Emily nodded, her throat tight. She didn't seek accolades, but the acknowledgement was welcome. She understood that the battle had changed them all, and that leadership wasn't about recognition. It was about action, guidance, and the unwavering commitment to others. As the fire crackled, Emily allowed herself a moment of reflection. The valley had taken much, but it had also given her clarity. Courage was not the absence of fear. It was the persistence to act despite it. Leadership was not about rank. It was about presence, guidance, and resilience. And survival was not merely about living through the moment, but about carrying the lessons forward, shaping the future with wisdom forged in adversity. The shadows of the valley would remain, etched in memory and spirit. But Emily Carter had faced them, embraced them, and transformed them into a source of strength. She had discovered courage she didn't know she possessed, resilience that would carry her through future challenges, and a profound understanding of the weight and value of human life. And as night fully settled over the outpost, Emily Carter sat quietly, rifle at her side, heart steady, mind alert. The battle was over, but the journey continued, a journey defined by courage, reflection, and the unwavering commitment to those who relied on her. The shadows of the valley would always be there, but they no longer intimidated her. They had become a testament to her strength, endurance, and the enduring power of courage in the face of impossible odds. The valley, now quiet and scarred, had left its mark on Emily Carter in ways she would carry for the rest of her life. Days had passed since the ambush, yet every moment, every sound, and every shadow reminded her of what had transpired. She had survived, her squad had survived, but the experience had changed her profoundly. Courage, she realized, was not fleeting. It lingered, etched into the soul, shaping identity and destiny. Emily moved among her soldiers at the base, observing them as they adjusted to a fragile calm. The adrenaline that had carried them through the ambush had faded, replaced by fatigue, reflection, and the quiet processing of trauma. She watched Louis carefully, noting the subtle tremor in his hands. She saw Halle staring at the horizon, silent and contemplative. and she recognized the same exhaustion in Ramos, his usual chatter replaced by quiet vigilance. Though she herself felt the weight of the days spent under fire, Emily's role had shifted yet again. She was no longer just the medic or the defender. She was a mentor, a guide, and a source of emotional stability. She understood that the true legacy of the ambush was not the weapons fired or the wounds treated, but the lessons imparted, the courage nurtured, and the unity forged in the crucible of danger. The soldiers gathered around the small campfire in the evening, a ritual of quiet reflection and camaraderie. The flickering flames illuminated the scarred faces of those who had faced death and returned. Emily listened as they shared their experiences, their fears, and the moments that had defined their survival. Each story was a thread, weaving a tapestry of courage, pain, and resilience. "Emily," Halle said softly, breaking the silence, "I don't think I've ever seen anyone like you. You carried us through when we didn't know we could make it." Emily looked at him, her expression calm, but tinged with fatigue. "You carried yourselves," she said. "I just happened to be the one who acted first." "Courage is contagious, Halle. You saw it in yourselves too, even if you didn't realize it." Ramos, sitting across the fire, nodded. "Yeah, I saw it. You made us all better, stronger. You didn't just save lives. You reminded us why we fight, why we survive." Emily allowed herself a faint smile. Recognition was not what she sought, but it was grounding. She realized that leadership and courage were not measured by accolades, medals, or recognition, but by the influence one had on others, the inspiration to act, to persevere, and to survive despite overwhelming odds. Over the following weeks, Emily continued her duties, guiding the squad through physical recovery, training, and psychological resilience. She emphasized teamwork, trust, and communication, drawing directly from the lessons learned in the valley. The soldiers responded, their confidence growing, their trust in her unwavering. Emily had become a symbol of valor, a living testament to the potential within each of them to rise above fear. Yet the valley's shadows were never far from her mind. Nights were hardest, when silence replaced the chaos, and memories resurfaced unbidden. She sometimes woke in the dark, reliving the ambush, hearing the echoes of gunfire, smelling the smoke, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing on her chest. But Emily had learned to confront these shadows, to acknowledge them without letting them consume her. She had discovered that resilience was not the absence of fear or memory, but the ability to live with them, to draw strength from them, and to guide others through similar trials. One morning, Emily led the squad on a training exercise in a nearby canyon. The terrain, jagged and unfamiliar, reminded her of the valley where the ambush had occurred. She moved confidently among the soldiers, instructing them in tactical maneuvers, medical protocols, and defensive strategies. Her voice carried authority and reassurance, shaped by experience and tempered by empathy. She had become more than a medic. She was a leader, a strategist, and a mentor. During a pause in the exercise, she reflected on how far she had come. The ambush had forced her to pick up a rifle, to confront death head-on, and to carry the weight of lives in her hands. She had acted decisively when hesitation could have meant death. She had crossed boundaries she never imagined crossing, and in doing so, she had discovered strength, courage, and resilience she didn't know she possessed. Captain Rhodes approached her later that day, his expression serious, but tinged with pride. "Emily," he said, "the actions you took back in the valley, they've changed how we operate, how we think about leadership, and how we approach training. Your courage has created a legacy here that will last far beyond this deployment." Emily shook her head, humbled. "I just did what had to be done," she replied softly. The real legacy is in the soldiers themselves. They survived, they learned, and they grew. That's what matters. Yet she understood the truth in Rhodes' words. Her courage, decisiveness, and steadfast commitment had become a model, a benchmark for her squad and for future medics and soldiers who would hear her story. She had redefined what it meant to be a medic in combat, blending healing with defense, compassion with decisive action, and empathy with courage under fire. In the evenings, Emily often walked alone along the perimeter, reflecting on the ambush, her squad, and the lessons learned. The valley had left its mark on her, and she on it. She thought of the soldiers she had saved, the lives that had been altered by her choices, and the comrades who had fallen. Memory, loss, and courage intertwined, shaping her identity and guiding her future. She knew that the ambush had not just tested her physically or mentally, but morally and emotionally. It had forced her to reconcile the duality of her role, healer and fighter, protector and combatant. She had done what few imagined a medic could do, and in the process, had forged a new understanding of courage, leadership, and responsibility. Emily's story, though deeply personal, became emblematic of the human capacity for bravery. Word of her actions spread through the unit and eventually to other bases. Soldiers spoke of the medic who had picked up a rifle, who had defended her squad with precision and determination, who had healed the wounded while confronting relentless danger. She became a symbol, not of invincibility, but of resilience, courage, and the quiet heroism that emerges in moments of extreme adversity. Months later, back on home soil, Emily reflected on her journey. She visited the families of fallen soldiers, offering comfort and recounting the bravery of their loved ones. She spoke to new recruits, emphasizing that courage was not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. That leadership was not about rank, but about action, presence, and integrity. She shared her story not to seek recognition, but to inspire resilience, empathy, and determination. Emily Carter had begun as a medic who never imagined fighting, yet she had become a defender, a leader, and a beacon of valor. The ambush had transformed her, forcing her to confront fear, death, and moral complexity. But it had also revealed her extraordinary capacity for courage, resilience, and leadership. The valley, with its dust, blood, and chaos, remained in her memory, a shadow and a teacher. It had tested her limits and expanded them, shown her the power of presence and decisive action, and left a legacy of courage that would ripple through those she led and inspired. In quiet moments, Emily would recall the faces of her squad, the sound of gunfire, the weight of responsibility, and the unshakable resolve that carried them through. She would remember the fallen and honor them through action, reflection, and teaching. She understood that heroism was not about glory, but about persistence, sacrifice, and the unwavering commitment to life, to protect it, to heal it, and when necessary, to defend it. And so, Emily Carter carried her legacy forward. A medic who had been thrust into combat, who had faced unimaginable challenges, and who had emerged transformed. Her story became one of resilience, leadership, and the profound human capacity for courage under fire. The valley had tested her. The ambush had reshaped her, and through it all, she had discovered a truth that would guide her forever. Courage is forged in action, sustained through reflection, and immortalized in the lives one touches. The legacy of valor, etched in dust, blood, and memory, would endure, carried by Emily and by all those whose lives she had fought to save. And in the echoes of that valley, she found both remembrance and purpose, a testament to the extraordinary potential of the human spirit when faced with the crucible of survival.